I sat in that sterile hospital bed 2 weeks after my heart attack, spooning cold orange Jell-O into my mouth and smiling like I'd just won the lottery. The nurses probably thought the medications were making me loopy, but I knew something my son Marcus didn't. While he was busy choosing his wife's birthday party over his dying mother, I'd already made a phone call that would change everything. The house he'd been eyeing like a vulture gone, sold to a sweet family with twin toddlers who'd fill those empty rooms with laughter instead of greed. My name is Jolene, and at 68 years old, I thought I knew what betrayal looked like. I'd buried my husband Frank 3 years earlier after 42 years of marriage, watched friends turn their backs when I needed them most, and rebuilt my life from scratch. But nothing prepared me for the night my only child chose champagne over my cardiac arrest. Let me paint you a picture of what I'd built in this life. After Frank passed, I threw myself into expanding the catering business I'd started in our kitchen 35 years ago. Jolene's Table had become Denver's go-to company for weddings, corporate events, and celebrations. I employed 12 people, owned 2 delivery trucks, and had built a client list that included the mayor's office and 3 country clubs. My Victorian home on Elm Street represented every sacrifice, every 16-hour workday, every dollar saved. 8 bedrooms, wraparound porch, original hardwood floors that gleamed like mirrors. The real estate market in our suburban neighborhood had exploded. My house was worth $800,000, maybe more. Every shingle on that roof represented a dream fulfilled, a promise kept to Frank that I'd never let our family struggle. Marcus was my pride and joy, my golden boy who'd graduated law school debt-free because his mama worked herself to the bone paying tuition. At 32, he worked for a prestigious firm downtown, drove a BMW, and lived in a penthouse apartment I'd helped furnish. He'd married Ashley 3 years ago in a ceremony that cost me $40,000, but I'd written that check with tears of happiness. Ashley was 28, blonde, and beautiful in that artificial Instagram way. She called herself a social media influencer, which seemed to involve taking pictures of expensive things and promoting diet teas to teenage girls. Her daily routine consisted of yoga classes, shopping trips, and photo shoots in scenic locations around Colorado. Marcus paid for everything while she built her brand. The night my heart tried to quit on me started like any other. Tuesday evening, October 15th, I was updating invoices for a wedding we'd catered that weekend. The crushing pain hit me like a freight train around 8:30, radiating down my left arm and squeezing my chest until I couldn't breathe. I managed to dial 911, gasping into the phone that I thought I was having a heart attack. The dispatcher stayed on the line while I unlocked my front door, then collapsed on my hallway floor, clutching my chest and praying I wouldn't die alone on those cold tiles. From the ambulance with an oxygen mask strapped to my face and an IV pumping drugs into my arm, I called Marcus. My hands shook as I dialed his number, certain that hearing his voice would calm the terror racing through my veins. "Marcus, honey, I'm in an ambulance." I whispered my voice, barely audible over the sirens. "I think I'm having a heart attack. I need you at Denver General, please." The silence stretched so long I wondered if the call had dropped. Then came his voice, annoyed and distant. "Mom, you're probably just having anxiety again. Remember last month when you thought you had food poisoning? Ashley's birthday party is tonight. We're at Del Frisco's with all her friends, and she's been planning this for months. I can't just leave." "Marcus, please, I'm scared. The paramedic says my heart rhythm is irregular and they're giving me medication. I really think this is serious." "Look, if you're still feeling bad tomorrow, I'll swing by after work. Ashley's about to cut her cake, and honestly, you know how she gets when things don't go according to plan. I'll call you later." The line went dead. I stared at my phone, certain I'd misheard. The paramedic, a kind woman named Rosa, squeezed my hand and said gently, "Some people don't handle medical emergencies well, honey. Try not to worry about anything except getting better." At the hospital, everything happened in a blur of urgent voices and fluorescent lights. Dr. Mitchell Carver, the cardiologist on duty, explained that I was indeed having a massive heart attack. 2 of my main arteries were blocked, and I needed emergency surgery immediately. "Do you have family we should call?" he asked while nurses prepped me for the operating room. "My son," I managed to say, "but he's busy tonight." The look that passed between Dr. Carver and the surgical nurse told me everything I needed to know about how that sounded. They wheeled me into surgery at 11:15, and I went under anesthesia wondering if I'd ever wake up to see another sunrise. What I learned later was that I flatlined twice during the 4-hour procedure. Twice my heart completely stopped beating while surgeons fought to save my life. Dr. Carver had to use the paddles to restart my heart the second time, sending electricity coursing through my body to jolt it back to life. At 11:30, while my heart was stopping for the first time on an operating table, Marcus was posting Instagram stories of Ashley blowing out candles on a $300 custom cake, captioned, "My beautiful wife's special day." At 12:45, when my heart stopped the second time and alarms were screaming in the operating room, Ashley was posting a selfie with her birthday tiara writing, "Best husband ever for making tonight perfect." I woke up in intensive care at 6 in the morning alone with tubes down my throat and machines monitoring every heartbeat. The first person I saw was Rosa, the paramedic who'd stopped by before her shift ended. "You're one tough lady," she said, tears in her eyes. "We weren't sure you'd make it through the night." 3 days passed before Marcus darkened the doorway of my hospital room, and when he finally appeared, Ashley was attached to his arm like an expensive accessory. I was still weak, still connected to heart monitors and oxygen, but alert enough to observe the performance that was about to unfold. Ashley waltzed in wearing a designer outfit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Her first action wasn't to ask how I was feeling or apologize for Marcus's absence during my near-death experience. Instead, she pulled out her phone and started staging photos around my hospital bed. "The lighting in here is actually really good," she announced, adjusting the angle of my water pitcher to catch the afternoon sun streaming through the window. "Very authentic, very raw." She positioned herself next to my bed, arranged her face into an expression of concern that looked practiced in a mirror, and started taking selfies. Marcus stood awkwardly in the corner checking his own phone while his wife turned my cardiac intensive care unit into her personal photo studio. "This is perfect for my Wellness Wednesday post," Ashley chirped, reviewing the images. "I'll caption it something about family being everything and how important it is to appreciate the people you love." I watched this display with growing disbelief, but I kept my mouth shut. Something about the casual way they'd waltzed in here 3 days late and completely self-absorbed made me want to pay closer attention to what they weren't saying. "Mom, you look much better," Marcus said, though he was looking at his phone instead of at me. "The nurses said you're responding well to treatment." "I flatlined twice during surgery," I told him quietly. "Dr. Carver said another 10 minutes and I wouldn't have made it." Ashley looked up from her phone just long enough to say, "Well, you're fine now, so that's what matters." Then she went back to editing her photos, adding filters to make the harsh hospital lighting look more dramatic. During their 30-minute visit, Ashley managed to post 4 different images to her Instagram account. One showed my flowers from the nursing staff with the caption, "Hospital flowers hit different." Another featured my Jell-O cup with, "Sometimes the simple things are the most beautiful." The third was a close-up of her holding my hand captioned, "Love is staying strong for the people who need you most." The irony of that last caption wasn't lost on me. As they prepared to leave, Ashley casually mentioned that they'd been house hunting in Cherry Creek, one of Denver's most expensive neighborhoods. "The market is just insane right now," she sighed dramatically. "We found this gorgeous place with a pool and a 3-car garage, but the down payment is like $200,000. It's so frustrating being young and having champagne taste on a beer budget, you know." Marcus shifted uncomfortably, shooting Ashley a look that clearly meant she was being too obvious, but she continued undeterred. "I mean, it's silly for you to be rattling around in that big house all by yourself, Jolene. 8 bedrooms for one person. That's just not practical. Have you ever thought about downsizing to something smaller? Maybe a nice little condo." The audacity of this woman suggesting I sell my home while I was still hooked up to machines that were keeping me alive should have shocked me. Instead, it clarified something important. This wasn't a casual conversation about real estate. This was a campaign. I haven't really thought about it. I lied, letting my voice sound weak and confused. Everything feels so overwhelming right now. Of course it does, Mom, Marcus said, his lawyer voice kicking in. You don't need to make any big decisions while you're recovering, but Ashley has a point about the house being too much for you to manage alone. After they left, I lay in bed replaying every word, every gesture, every meaningful look they'd exchanged. Something felt orchestrated about this visit, like they'd rehearsed their lines before walking into my room. That's when I heard Ashley's voice in the hallway talking on her phone just outside my door. She must have thought I was asleep or too medicated to pay attention. No, she looks pretty bad, Ashley was saying, like really frail and confused. Marcus thinks we might get the house sooner than expected, which is honestly a relief, because I can't keep pretending to care about her boring stories much longer. There was a pause, then Ashley's laugh bright and cruel. I've already got a whole Pinterest board ready for the renovations. We'll gut the kitchen first, then convert that awful craft room into a walk-in closet. The house will be gorgeous once we get rid of all her old lady furniture. My blood ran cold as I listened to this woman discuss redecorating my home while I was still fighting for my life in a hospital bed. But what came next made my heart rate spike so dramatically that the monitors started beeping. The best part is she's so grateful that Marcus is finally paying attention to her. She has no idea we've been planning this for months. My grandmother always said the key to a good inheritance is making sure the old person dies, thinking you actually care about them. The monitors were beeping louder now, and I heard footsteps approaching my room. Ashley's voice grew fainter as she moved down the hallway, but her final words carried clearly. Trust me, by Christmas we'll be living in that house and Jolene will be nothing but a sad memory and a very healthy bank balance. A nurse appeared at my bedside, concerned about my elevated heart rate. I told her I'd had a nightmare, that I was fine, just shaken. She adjusted my medication and dimmed the lights, encouraging me to rest. But rest was the last thing on my mind. As I lay there in the darkness, I began to understand that my son and his wife hadn't just abandoned me during a medical emergency. They'd been actively hoping I wouldn't survive it. The ride home from the hospital a week later was the loneliest journey of my life. I'd called a taxi because Marcus claimed he couldn't get off work, and Ashley was apparently having a crisis about a sponsored post for skincare products that wasn't getting enough engagement. My beautiful Victorian house felt different when I walked through the front door. Everything was exactly as I'd left it the night of my heart attack, but knowing that Ashley was already planning to gut my kitchen and turn Frank's memory room into her closet made every familiar corner feel violated. I shuffled slowly through the rooms, one hand pressed to my chest, playing the part of the frail, recovering cardiac patient. But inside my mind was racing. I'd spent 7 days in that hospital bed thinking about Ashley's hallway conversation, analyzing every word, every implication. She'd said they'd been planning this for months. That meant this wasn't some spontaneous greed sparked by my heart attack. They'd been sitting in my living room, eating my food, accepting my generosity, all while plotting how to profit from my death. The doorbell rang the next afternoon, and I opened it to find Marcus and Ashley standing on my porch with a pathetic bouquet of wilted daisies from a gas station convenience store. The price sticker was still attached, $4.99. "We wanted to check on you," Marcus said, though his eyes were already scanning my entryway like he was taking inventory. I invited them in, making sure to walk slowly and pause dramatically to catch my breath. Ashley immediately began wandering through my house with the confidence of someone who already considered herself the owner. "Jolene, you really should think about getting one of those medical alert necklaces," she called from the kitchen. "You know, in case something happens when you're all alone in this big house." The way she emphasized alone and big house wasn't subtle, but I pretended not to notice the implications. "That's thoughtful of you to worry," I replied, settling carefully into Frank's old recliner and putting on my best grateful smile. While Marcus made awkward small talk about my medications and doctor's appointments, Ashley continued her tour of my home. I could hear her opening cabinets, drawers, even the pantry. When she returned to the living room, her eyes were bright, with the kind of excitement you see in children on Christmas morning. "Marcus, we should help your mom organize all these rooms," she announced. "I bet there's so much stuff she doesn't even remember she has. We could help her clean out the clutter, maybe donate some things she doesn't need anymore." I knew exactly what kind of donating she had in mind. The silver tea service my grandmother had brought from Ireland, Frank's collection of first edition novels, my mother's china cabinet filled with Waterford crystal. "That's very generous of you," I said weakly. "I do get overwhelmed thinking about all the things I've accumulated over the years." "See, Marcus, she needs our help," Ashley said, shooting him a meaningful look. While I pretended to doze in my chair, they began discussing my house like I wasn't sitting right there. Ashley pulled out her phone and started taking pictures of my living room, muttering about staging and flow and maximizing the space. "We could knock out this wall between the living room and dining room," she told Marcus, gesturing expansively. "Create one of those open concept layouts that are so popular now. And honestly, all this dark wood is so dated. Everything would look amazing painted white." Marcus looked uncomfortable with how obvious she was being, but he didn't stop her. Instead, he started his own subtle assessment of my belongings. "Mom, do you have all your important papers organized? Your will, insurance policies, bank information? It might be good to go through everything while you're feeling better just to make sure it's all up to date." The conversation I'd overheard in the hospital corridor suddenly made perfect sense. They weren't just waiting for me to die naturally. They were positioning themselves to take control of my assets before that happened. I spent the rest of their visit gathering intelligence while maintaining my helpless, elderly woman act. Ashley took 43 photos of my house during that 2-hour visit. Marcus asked detailed questions about my mortgage status, my insurance coverage, and whether I'd updated my will since Frank's death. When they finally left, promising to check on me again soon, I waited exactly 10 minutes before calling my lawyer, Harold Brennan. Harold had handled Frank's estate and had been our family attorney for 20 years. If anyone would give me straight answers about what Marcus and Ashley might be planning, it would be Harold. "Jolene, I'm so glad to hear your voice," Harold said when his secretary put me through. "I heard about your heart attack through the grapevine. How are you feeling?" "Harold, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Has Marcus contacted you recently about my estate or any of my legal affairs?" The pause on Harold's end told me everything I needed to know before he spoke. "Jolene, I think you and I need to have a face-to-face conversation. Can you come to my office tomorrow afternoon?" The next day, sitting in Harold's wood-paneled office downtown, I learned the full scope of what my son had been attempting behind my back. "Marcus called me 6 weeks ago," Harold began carefully. "He wanted to know about your will, specifically whether there were any provisions for power of attorney in case of mental incapacity. 6 weeks ago. That was a full month before my heart attack. He also asked about the process for having someone declared mentally incompetent in Colorado. He claimed you'd been showing signs of dementia, forgetting conversations, making poor financial decisions." I felt like I'd been slapped. "Harold, you know that's not true." "Of course I know that. You're sharper than people half your age, and your business records show excellent financial management. But Marcus seemed convinced you were declining mentally. He wanted to know how he could protect you from making harmful decisions." The pieces of their plan were becoming clearer. If they couldn't wait for me to die naturally, they'd have me declared incompetent and take control of my assets while I was still alive. Ashley's Pinterest boards would become reality much sooner that way. "Harold, I need you to help me protect myself, but I need you to do it quietly. Can we set up some safeguards without Marcus knowing?" Harold leaned forward, his expression serious. "Jolene, what exactly are you dealing with here?" I told him everything. The night of my heart attack, Ashley's hallway conversation, their house tour disguised as a wellness check, Marcus's questions about my legal affairs. Harold listened without interrupting, taking notes in his careful handwriting. When I finished, Harold set down his pen and looked at me with something approaching amazement. In 40 years of practicing law, I've seen a lot of family greed, but this is particularly calculating. You're right to be concerned, and you're right to take action now. We spent the next 2 hours setting up what Harold called defensive measures. He helped me create a new trust account at a different bank, one where Marcus had no access or visibility. We updated my will with specific language, preventing anyone from contesting it on grounds of mental incapacity. Most importantly, Harold gave me the name of someone who could help me gather evidence of what Marcus and Ashley were planning. Sandra Walsh is a private investigator who specializes in elder fraud and family financial abuse. Harold explained writing her number on his business card. If your suspicions are correct, you'll need documentation to protect yourself. Walking out of Harold's office that afternoon, I felt something I hadn't experienced since the night of my heart attack hope. Not the hope that my son would suddenly remember how to love his mother, but hope that I could outsmart them both before they destroyed everything Frank and I had built together. The game was just beginning, and for the first time in my life, I was going to play to win. Calling Sandra Walsh was the smartest decision I'd made since my heart attack. She arrived at my house the next morning disguised as a home healthcare aide, complete with a medical bag and clipboard. To anyone watching, she was simply another service provider, helping an elderly cardiac patient with her recovery. Sandra was nothing like the private investigators you see in movies. She was a former police detective in her 50s, with graying brown hair and the kind of observant eyes that missed nothing. She set up in my kitchen like she was taking my vital signs while we discussed the situation in hushed tones. Elder financial abuse is more common than people think, Sandra explained while pretending to check my blood pressure. Family members are responsible for about 60% of these cases, and they often start planning long before any medical crisis occurs. She helped me install a discrete security system throughout my house cameras, so small they look like smoke detectors or electrical outlets. She also set up recording software on my smartphone that would activate with a simple voice command. Document everything, Sandra advised. Conversations, visits, any attempts to access your personal information. If they're planning what you think they're planning, they'll get bolder as they think you're getting weaker. I didn't have to wait long for the next act in their performance. Marcus called that evening to say he and Ashley would be coming by Saturday morning to help me organize my paperwork. The concern in his voice sounded so genuine that for a moment I almost questioned my own suspicions. Saturday arrived with a light snow dusting the sidewalks, making my Victorian house look like a Christmas card. Marcus and Ashley showed up promptly at 10, armed with file folders, legal pads, and Ashley's ever-present phone for documenting their good deeds. We brought coffee and those blueberry muffins you like from that bakery on 16th Street. Ashley announced, though, the coffee was lukewarm and the muffins were clearly day-old clearance items. I played my part perfectly, shuffling around in my bathrobe and slippers, expressing gratitude for their thoughtfulness while secretly activating the recording app on my phone. I've been feeling so scattered lately, I told them with a confused sigh. Sometimes I can't remember if I paid a bill or where I put important documents. It's frightening to feel like my mind isn't working the way it used to. Marcus and Ashley exchanged a look that the hidden cameras captured perfectly. This was exactly what they wanted to hear. That's completely normal after a major cardiac event, Mom, Marcus said in his most professional voice. The stress and medications can definitely affect cognitive function. That's why we want to help you get organized now while you're feeling better. They settled themselves at my dining room table and began requesting various documents. Bank statements, insurance policies, the deed to my house, my Social Security information, investment account details. I provided everything they asked for, watching as Ashley photographed each page with her phone while pretending to organize them into folders. "Jolene, your house insurance seems really expensive," Ashley commented, studying my policy. "Have you shopped around recently? I bet we could find you something cheaper." What she was really doing was calculating the replacement value of my property, but I nodded along as if her concern was touching. "And this investment account," Marcus added, reviewing my quarterly statement. "The management fees seem high. Maybe we should look into moving this money somewhere with better returns." By we, he clearly meant himself and Ashley. I made non-committal sounds about trusting their judgment while mentally cataloging every suggestion they made. Each recommendation involved transferring control of my assets to accounts they could more easily access. The most revealing moment came when Ashley excused herself to use the restroom. I heard her footsteps on the stairs, but instead of going to the guest bathroom, she went straight to my bedroom. The cameras I'd installed captured her going through my jewelry box, my dresser drawers, even the safe where I kept Frank's important papers. She spent 15 minutes in my room photographing jewelry, collecting serial numbers from electronics, and making a detailed inventory of anything valuable. When she returned downstairs, her cheeks were flushed with excitement. "Your house is so beautiful, Jolene," she gushed. "I took a few pictures of your bedroom furniture. That antique vanity is gorgeous. Is it a family piece?" "It was my grandmother's," I replied, knowing now that Ashley was already planning how to sell it. The visit stretched into the afternoon with Marcus and Ashley finding increasingly creative ways to assess my mental state and financial situation. Ashley suggested I might benefit from a money management service to help with bills and expenses. Marcus recommended I consider giving someone power of attorney, just in case I had another medical emergency. "We just want to make sure you're protected, Mom," Marcus said, and the sincerity in his voice was so perfect that I almost believed he meant it. But the cameras captured what happened after I pretended to fall asleep in my chair. Ashley immediately pulled out her phone and began taking detailed photos of every room in my house, while Marcus went through my mail and copied information from bills and bank statements. "The kitchen renovation is going to be amazing," Ashley whispered to Marcus while photographing my appliances. "I'm thinking marble countertops, maybe those trendy brass fixtures. We could probably get $50,000 just for the upgrades." "Don't get ahead of yourself," Marcus warned quietly. "We still need to handle the competency issue. Harold said the process can take months if she fights it." My blood chilled as I listened to them discuss having me declared mentally incompetent like it was a minor administrative task. "She won't fight it if she doesn't understand what's happening," Ashley replied. "I've been researching medications that can cause confusion in elderly people. Nothing dangerous, just enough to make her seem more impaired when the court evaluator comes. They were planning to drug me. The realization hit me like a physical blow, but I forced myself to remain still in my chair, breathing slowly and evenly like I was genuinely asleep. "Ashley, that seems extreme," Marcus said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Marcus, your mother is worth almost $1 million in assets. This house, her business equipment, her investments, her life insurance. We're talking about setting ourselves up for life. A few months of playing nursemaid to a confused old lady seems like a pretty good trade-off." When they finally left that evening, promising to return the following week to continue organizing, I sat in my living room reviewing everything the cameras and audio equipment had captured. Sandra was right. They were getting bolder, more careless with their planning, because they believed I was becoming more helpless. That night, I called Sandra to arrange a meeting. It was time to take the next step in protecting myself, because I now understood that Marcus and Ashley weren't just waiting for me to die, or planning to have me declared incompetent. They were prepared to actively hasten my mental decline to get what they wanted. The war for my life and legacy had officially begun, and I was going to make sure I was the one left standing when the smoke cleared. Sandra Walsh arrived Monday morning with news that made my blood run cold and my resolve turn to steel. She'd spent the weekend investigating Ashley's background, and what she'd discovered was far worse than simple greed. "Ashley Morrison isn't her real name," Sandra said, spreading photographs and documents across my kitchen table. "She's actually Crystal Marie Mendez, and she has a history of targeting elderly family members through marriage to their sons or grandsons." The photos showed a younger version of Ashley with different colored hair in what appeared to be mugshots. Sandra pointed to a police report from Arizona dated 2 years before Ashley met Marcus. She married the son of a 73-year-old widow named Dorothy Chen in Phoenix. Within 6 months, Dorothy was showing signs of what doctors thought was rapid onset dementia. Crystal convinced Dorothy's son that his mother needed to be in a memory care facility, then systematically emptied Dorothy's accounts while she was institutionalized. My hands shook as I studied the documentation. Dorothy Chen had died alone in a state-run facility, while Crystal and her husband lived in Dorothy's house and spent her life savings. "There's more," Sandra continued grimly. Before Arizona, she pulled the same scheme in Oklahoma with an 80-year-old farmer named Robert Walsh. No relation to me, unfortunately. Robert's grandson fell for Crystal's act, and within a year, Robert was dead from what the coroner ruled as complications from Alzheimer's disease. "But he didn't really have Alzheimer's," I said, though it wasn't a question. "The symptoms appeared very suddenly and progressed unusually fast. By the time Robert's other family members became suspicious, Crystal and the grandson had liquidated his farm and disappeared. There wasn't enough evidence to prove foul play, but the pattern was clear to anyone paying attention." Sandra pulled out a final document that made my stomach lurch. Crystal has active warrants in both Arizona and Oklahoma for elder fraud and financial abuse. She's been using false identities, and somehow she managed to create a completely clean background as Ashley Morrison. "How did Marcus not know about this?" I asked, though part of me suspected the answer. "I did some digging into his finances," Sandra said carefully. "Marcus has been living beyond his means for the past 2 years. Credit cards, maxed out student loans, and default car payments behind. He needed money badly when he met Ashley, and she represented a solution to his problems." The truth was becoming crystal clear, and it was more devastating than I'd imagined. My son hadn't fallen victim to a scheming woman. He was an active participant in a plan to systematically destroy his own mother. "We need to be very careful about how we handle this," Sandra warned. "Crystal is experienced at this game, and she's managed to avoid prosecution twice. If we tip our hand too early, she'll disappear, and you'll never see justice." We spent the rest of the morning developing what Sandra called the ultimate sting operation. The plan was risky, but it was the only way to gather enough evidence to protect me and ensure that Crystal and Marcus faced consequences for what they'd done to other families and what they were planning to do to me. First, I would convince them that my mental health was declining rapidly. Sandra provided me with research about medications and behaviors that would create believable symptoms of cognitive impairment without actually harming me. "You need to make them think their plan is working faster than expected," Sandra explained. "If they believe you're becoming incompetent naturally, they might get careless and reveal more of their strategy. Second, we would create a fake financial crisis that would make them desperate to accelerate their timeline. Sandra had contacts who could help us stage some convincing documentation. We'll make it appear that your investments are failing and you're at risk of losing significant money. That should push them to move faster on getting control of your assets. Third, I would offer them exactly what they wanted while secretly documenting everything they said and did. Give them power of attorney, but make sure it's the fake documents Harold is preparing. Let them think they're winning while we're actually gathering evidence that will destroy them in court. The most dangerous part of the plan involved allowing them to believe I was vulnerable to their manipulation, including whatever drugs Crystal was planning to use to make me appear confused and disoriented. Sandra, what if they actually succeed in having me declared incompetent? What if something goes wrong? Harold has prepared legal safeguards, and I'll be monitoring everything. Plus, we'll have enough evidence long before any court hearing to have them arrested. Trust me, Jolene. I've seen too many families destroyed by people like Crystal. We're going to stop this. That afternoon, I called Marcus and put the first phase of our plan into motion. "Honey, I'm feeling really overwhelmed," I told him, making my voice sound shaky and uncertain. "I think I made some mistakes with my bills this month, and I'm scared I'm losing track of things." Marcus was at my house within an hour, Ashley trailing behind him with barely concealed excitement. They found me sitting at my kitchen table, surrounded by unpaid bills and financial statements, looking confused and distressed. "Mom, what's wrong?" Marcus asked, though I could see him cataloging the evidence of my mental decline. "I can't remember if I paid the electric bill," I said, pointing at a stack of papers Sandra had helped me arrange. and I think someone might be stealing money from my checking account. The numbers don't make sense anymore." Ashley moved closer to examine the financial documents, her eyes bright with interest. "Jolene, these investment statements look really concerning. It says here you've lost almost $50,000 in the past month." The fake statements Sandra's contact had prepared were works of art showing dramatic losses in what appeared to be my retirement portfolio. To Marcus and Ashley, it would look like I was hemorrhaging money due to poor decision-making and market volatility. "I don't understand any of this," I said, letting genuine tears fall. "Frank always handled the investments. I feel so stupid and lost." Marcus sat down beside me and took my hands in his, and for a moment I saw a flicker of the little boy who used to crawl into my lap when he had nightmares. But the moment passed quickly as Ashley began organizing the fake documents. "Marcus, your mother needs help immediately," Ashley said in her most authoritative voice. "She could lose everything if she keeps making these kinds of financial mistakes. We need to get her some professional help." "What kind of help?" Marcus asked, though I could tell he already knew where this conversation was headed. "Power of attorney," Ashley replied without hesitation. "Just temporarily until she's feeling better and can think more clearly. We could help her get back on track financially and make sure she doesn't lose her house or her retirement money." They spent the next 2 hours walking me through what they presented as a solution to my confusion, but was actually their master plan to take control of every asset I owned. They had documents ready as if they'd been carrying them around, waiting for the right moment to present them. Marcus explained how power of attorney would allow them to pay my bills, manage my investments, and protect me from making any more costly mistakes. Ashley added that it would give me peace of mind knowing that people who loved me were handling my affairs. "We just want to take care of you, Mom," Marcus said, and the sincerity in his voice was so perfect that I understood how Dorothy Chen and Robert Walsh had been fooled. I signed the fake documents Harold had prepared, making sure to appear grateful and relieved that my loving family was stepping up to help me. As soon as the papers were signed, I could see the change in their demeanor. Ashley began speaking more boldly about reorganizing my finances, while Marcus started discussing which of my possessions might need to be liquidated to cover my losses. "The important thing is that you're safe now," Ashley said, squeezing my hand with fake warmth. "You don't have to worry about money or bills or any of that confusing stuff anymore. We'll handle everything." That evening, after they left with copies of the fake power of attorney documents, Sandra and I reviewed the recordings from our surveillance equipment. We had them on camera discussing their timeline for selling my house, their plans to move my money into accounts they controlled, and Ashley's casual mention of how much easier this was going to be than the situation in Arizona. "They're going to move fast now," Sandra warned me. "Probably within the next few days. Are you ready for the final phase?" I looked around my kitchen at the walls that held 40 years of memories at the window, where I'd watched Marcus learn to ride his bicycle in the backyard at the table, where we'd shared thousands of family meals. "I'm ready," I said, and I meant it. It was time to spring the trap. The final act began 3 days later when Ashley brought coffee and homemade cookies to what she called our family planning meeting. I should have known immediately that something was wrong because Ashley had never baked anything in her life, but I was focused on playing my part in Sandra's carefully orchestrated plan. "I thought we could discuss some changes that might make your life easier," Ashley said sweetly, arranging store-bought cookies on my grandmother's china plates like she was hosting a tea party. Marcus looked uncomfortable, shifting in his chair and avoiding direct eye contact with me. I wondered if some part of him understood how far they'd strayed from anything resembling family love, but his greed had apparently silenced whatever conscience he might have had left. "We've been doing some research on assisted living facilities." Ashley continued pulling out glossy brochures like she was planning a vacation. "There are some beautiful places where you could get round-the-clock care and wouldn't have to worry about maintaining this big house." The beautiful places in her brochures were budget nursing homes with 1-star reviews and state violations for neglect. The most expensive option was less than half what quality care actually cost, which meant they were planning to pocket the difference from selling my house. I don't know, I said hesitantly, sticking to the script Sandra and I had rehearsed. This house has so many memories. I'm not sure I'm ready to leave. Mom, you're not thinking clearly, Marcus said, his lawyer voice taking over. You've been forgetting things, making mistakes with money, having trouble taking care of yourself. What if you fall down the stairs or have another heart attack when no one's around to help? The concern in his voice was so convincing that I had to remind myself that this man had been planning to drug me into submission for weeks. Ashley handed me the coffee she'd prepared, and I noticed it had a slightly bitter aftertaste that made my mouth feel chalky. Sandra had warned me that this might happen, that they would likely test whatever medication they'd chosen on a small scale before using a larger dose. The coffee tastes a little strange, I mentioned casually. Oh, I added some of that collagen powder to it, Ashley said quickly. It's supposed to be good for heart health and cognitive function. I've been putting it in all my drinks lately. I pretended to drink more while secretly spitting most of it into my napkin when they weren't looking. Within 20 minutes, I began acting drowsy and confused, exactly as Sandra had coached me. I'm feeling so tired all of a sudden, I murmured, letting my words slur slightly, and my head feels fuzzy. Marcus and Ashley exchanged a look of satisfaction that the hidden cameras captured perfectly. This was exactly what they'd been hoping for. Why don't you rest for a few minutes, Mom? Marcus suggested. Ashley and I can clean up while you close your eyes. I settled back in my chair and let my breathing become deep and regular, as if I was falling into an unnaturally heavy sleep. Through barely open eyelids, I watched them transform from concerned family members into calculating criminals. It's working faster than I expected, Ashley whispered to Marcus as she began photographing the inside of my purse, my credit cards, my driver's license. How much did you give her? Marcus asked nervously. Just a small dose to test it, but look how out of it she is. When the court evaluator comes next week, she'll be completely incoherent. My blood ran cold as I realized they'd already scheduled a competency hearing without my knowledge. They weren't just planning this scheme, they were actively implementing it. Are you sure this isn't dangerous? Marcus asked, though he was opening my mail and copying account numbers from bank statements while he spoke. Trust me, I've done this before, Ashley replied casually. It's not enough to hurt her, just enough to make her seem like she's losing her mind. The doctor will recommend full-time care. The court will declare her incompetent and will have complete control of her assets. What about after, Marcus pressed, what happens when she's in the nursing home? Ashley's laugh was cold and calculated. Marcus, your mother is 68 years old with a heart condition. These things have a way of working themselves out naturally. We just need to be patient. The casual way she discussed my death while I sat 3 feet away was more chilling than anything I could have imagined. This wasn't just financial fraud. They were planning what amounted to murder. I called the nursing home this morning. Ashley continued rifling through my jewelry box like she was shopping. Golden Years Manor has an opening next week. They don't ask many questions as long as the monthly payments are current, and the staff-to-patient ratio means your mother won't get much individual attention. That sounds perfect, Marcus said, and the enthusiasm in his voice broke whatever was left of my heart. They spent the next hour discussing their plans in detail while I pretended to sleep. Ashley had researched the most efficient way to liquidate my assets, including my house, my catering equipment, and my investment accounts. Marcus had prepared legal documents that would transfer everything to accounts he controlled. The beauty of power of attorney is that we can do all of this without her signature once she's been declared incompetent, Marcus explained. And if anyone asks questions later, we'll just say we were trying to preserve her assets for her care. How long do you think it will take? Ashley asked. 6 months to sell everything and transfer the money, Marcus replied. Maybe less if we price the house to sell quickly. I'm thinking we list it for $750, take the first decent offer. They were planning to sell my $800,000 house for $750,000 just to speed up the process. The callousness of it was breathtaking. "And then?" Ashley prompted. "Then we're millionaires and your mother-in-law becomes a very sad memory." I heard footsteps on my porch and recognized Sandra's predetermined signal that it was time to end this charade. The police were waiting outside and we had more than enough evidence to destroy both of them. "Actually, Marcus," I said, sitting up alertly and speaking in my normal, strong voice, "the only sad memory around here is going to be the son I raised who turned into a monster." The look of shock on their faces was worth every moment of terror I'd endured listening to their plans. Ashley dropped my jewelry box, scattering my grandmother's rings across the floor. Marcus went pale and started stammering something about misunderstanding what they'd been saying. Oh, I understood perfectly. I continued pulling out my phone and stopping the recording app. "I understood that you've been planning to drug me, steal my house, put me in a substandard nursing home, and wait for me to die. I also understood that Ashley here is actually Crystal Marie Mendez, and she's wanted for elder fraud in 2 states. Ashley bolted for the front door, but Sandra and 2 police officers were already walking up my steps. There was nowhere to run, and no way to explain away the hours of recorded evidence we'd gathered. "Crystal Marie Mendez, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit elder fraud, identity theft, and violation of parole," Detective Rodriguez announced as they handcuffed Ashley in my entryway. "Marcus Morrison, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit elder fraud, attempted poisoning, and financial abuse of a vulnerable adult." As the police read them their rights, Ashley turned to me with pure hatred in her eyes. "You played us," she snarled. "You crazy old witch, you played us." "No, sweetheart," I replied calmly. "I outplayed you. There's a difference." Marcus looked at me with something that might have been regret, but it was too little and far too late. "Mom, I can explain," he started, but I held up my hand to stop him. "Marcus, you stopped being my son the night you chose champagne over my heart attack. Everything that happened after that was just you proving I was right to stop trusting you." As the police led them away, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: peace. The war was over, and I had won. The trial was a media sensation that lasted 3 weeks and revealed the full scope of what Marcus and Crystal had planned for me and what Crystal had done to other families across the country. I testified for 2 days, telling the jury about the night of my heart attack, the overheard hallway conversation, and the months of deception that followed. But I wasn't the only victim who took the witness stand. Dorothy Chen's daughter flew in from California to describe how Crystal had systematically isolated her mother from family, convinced Dorothy's son to move her into an inadequate facility, and then disappeared with Dorothy's life savings. Dorothy had died alone, confused, and abandoned, while Crystal lived in her house and spent her money on designer clothes and expensive vacations. Robert Walsh's nephew testified about how Crystal had manipulated his cousin into believing that Robert was losing his mind, leading to Robert's premature death from what doctors now believed was intentional medication overdose rather than natural disease progression. The prosecution presented our recorded conversations, the hidden camera footage and financial records showing that Marcus had been living beyond his means for 2 years before meeting Crystal. They proved that Crystal had researched my assets months before my heart attack and had been systematically planning my destruction since shortly after she married Marcus. Harold testified about Marcus's attempts to have me declared mentally incompetent, and Sandra explained how Crystal's scheme followed the exact same pattern she'd used to victimize 2 other families. Marcus's defense attorney tried to argue that he'd been manipulated by Crystal and hadn't understood the full scope of her plan, but the recordings made it clear that Marcus had been an eager participant who'd suggested ideas for accessing my assets and had actively participated in planning to drug me. Crystal's lawyer attempted an insanity defense, claiming she suffered from a personality disorder that made her incapable of understanding right from wrong. But her methodical planning, her use of false identities, and her ability to evade law enforcement for years proved she knew exactly what she was doing and understood the consequences. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. Crystal was convicted on all counts: elder fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, attempted poisoning, and violations of her parole from previous convictions. The judge sentenced her to 12 years in federal prison with no possibility of early release. Marcus was convicted of conspiracy to commit elder fraud, financial abuse of a vulnerable adult, and attempted poisoning. He received 8 years in prison and lost his law license permanently. The Colorado Bar Association issued a statement saying that attorneys who prey on vulnerable family members represent the worst possible betrayal of public trust. But the legal victory was only part of my healing process. 2 weeks after the sentencing, I signed the papers to sell my Victorian house to the Chen family, who had twin 4-year-old boys and were expecting their 3rd child. Mrs. Chen cried when she walked through the kitchen, saying it was perfect for the big family dinners she'd always dreamed of hosting. I sold the house for full market value, $815,000, significantly more than the $750,000 that Crystal and Marcus had planned to sacrifice for a quick sale. With the proceeds from my house and the money I received from selling my catering business to my former assistant manager, I had more than enough to start the next chapter of my life exactly the way I wanted it. I bought a beautiful 2-bedroom condo in Clearwater Beach, Florida, with a balcony overlooking the Gulf of Mexico. Every morning I wake up to the sound of waves and the sight of pelicans fishing in the surf. My neighbors are a community of active retirees who play poker on Tuesday nights, host book clubs on Thursdays, and organize beach walks every weekend. But the most meaningful part of my new life is the Wise Women Foundation, which Harold helped me establish 6 months after the trial. We provide free legal aid, financial counseling, and educational resources for elderly people who are being targeted by family members or caregivers for financial abuse. Our hotline receives calls from all over the country: grandmothers whose sons are forging checks, widows whose daughters-in-law are stealing jewelry, elderly men whose caregivers are draining their bank accounts. We help them understand their legal options, connect them with law enforcement when necessary, and most importantly, we help them understand that they're not alone. Sandra Walsh joined the foundation as our chief investigator, and together we've helped expose 12 cases of elder fraud in our first year of operation. We've saved vulnerable seniors from losing more than $2 million in assets and have seen 7 family members prosecuted for financial abuse. The foundation also offers support groups for people who've been betrayed by their own children or family members. It's heartbreaking how common it is, but it's also healing to sit in a circle with other people who understand the unique pain of being abandoned by the people you sacrificed everything to love and support. 1 year after the trial, I received a letter from Marcus in prison. He wrote that he'd had time to think about what he'd done, that he was sorry for hurting me, and that he hoped someday I might be able to forgive him. He said prison had given him perspective on how far he'd strayed from the values I'd tried to teach him. I read the letter twice, then filed it away without responding. Some people deserve second chances, but some betrayals cut too deep for forgiveness to heal. Marcus made his choice the night he valued champagne over his mother's life, and every decision he made after that simply confirmed who he'd chosen to become. I don't hate him, but I don't have room in my new life for people who see me as an obstacle to their happiness, rather than a person worthy of love and respect. 6 months ago, I started dating Harold, my attorney and longtime friend. He's 71, widowed for 5 years, and has 3 grown children who treat their father like the treasure he is. We take long walks on the beach, cook dinner together in my little kitchen, and laugh about the fact that we've known each other for 20 years, but never realized how compatible we were. Harold's children have welcomed me into their family with open arms, and his grandchildren call me Grandma Joe. Last month, I helped his daughter plan her youngest son's birthday party, and watching that family celebrate together with genuine love and joy reminded me what healthy relationships are supposed to look like. Sometimes people ask if I regret not trying harder to maintain a relationship with Marcus, if I wonder whether I gave up on him too quickly. But I learned something important during those months when I thought he might actually care about my well-being. You can't love someone into being a better person. All you can do is protect yourself from people who choose to hurt you, even when those people happen to share your DNA. The night I almost died from my heart attack, I thought I was losing everything. Instead, I discovered that I had the strength to save myself and build a life filled with people who value me for who I am, rather than what I can give them. Every morning when I sit on my balcony with my coffee watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, I'm grateful that my heart attack led me to this life. It forced me to see the truth about Marcus and Crystal, but it also showed me that I was stronger, smarter, and more resilient than I'd ever imagined. I'm not the same woman who collapsed on her hallway floor that terrible October night. That woman was tired, taken for granted, and too generous with people who didn't deserve her kindness. The woman I am now knows her worth, protects her boundaries, and chooses carefully who gets access to her time, energy, and love. And that I've learned is the most valuable inheritance I could ever give myself. I learned that blood doesn't make family, loyalty, and love do. And sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is the courage to walk away from people who see you as an obstacle instead of a treasure. True family shows up when you're lying in a hospital bed, not when you're lying in a will. Have you ever had to make the difficult choice between family loyalty and self-protection? How did you find the strength to put your own well-being first when someone you loved was hurting you? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And please don't forget to like this video if my story resonated with you. Subscribe to my channel for more stories about finding strength in unexpected places. And share this with anyone who might need to hear that it's never too late to choose yourself. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that your life is worth fighting for no matter who tells you otherwise. Until next time, keep choosing courage over comfort and never let anyone dim your light.